Hello, my name is Aaron Nybert, and I am an undergraduate chemistry student at Southeast Missouri State University, and today I will be presenting a research proposal entitled An Examination of Heavy Metal Content in Chubs of the Mississippi River. A little background on this topic. Heavy metals are metallic elements with high atomic masses, many of which are known to be toxic to living organisms. The main four that we will be examining today that we will be examining in this experiment that are known to be toxic to living organisms are lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury. And since we're examining an aquatic organism, how do these heavy metals get into these bodies of water? Well, for the Mississippi River, heavy metal accumulation can be caused by natural processes due to gradual erosion and weathering of crusting materials. However, these processes usually take a very long time, and the heavy metal accumulation caused by these processes is usually very, very minimal. Most of the heavy metals that enter the Mississippi River are due to human activities such as industrial development and mining. There's a very large lead mining region located in Southeast Missouri State University called the New Lead Belt, which could be a possible source of heavy metals that may be getting into the Mississippi River. Heavy metals can have detrimental effects on living organisms. Literature I've reviewed has shown that fish that have heavy metal deposits in their blood and tissue have seen their necessary physiological processes stop. So it's very clear that we need to minimize the amount of heavy metals that our aquatic organisms are exposed to. And since we will be examining chubs of the Mississippi River, there could be secondhand effects on other organisms. Pallid sturgeon and catfish are two organisms that prey on chubs in the Mississippi River, and if there's heavy metal within the chubs, the pallid sturgeon and the catfish could be consuming these chubs and therefore ingesting heavy metals in their diet, and in turn we could catch a catfish out of the Mississippi River and consume it and therefore be consuming heavy metals in our diet. So environmental as well as concern for human health, it is very important to ensure that the amount of heavy metals in the river is minimized. The proposed experiment is to examine heavy metal content in chubs of the Mississippi River. We will take them from different areas along the Mississippi River within the state of Missouri, and possible outcomes we could get from doing this would be if there's a certain group of chubs from a certain area that have very high elevated sources of heavy metals, that have very high levels of heavy metals in their systems, we may be able to see if pinpoint a location where along the river where heavy metals may be leaking in if chubs from a certain area have very, very high heavy metal content. And this will also give us an overall idea of how much or of the extent of heavy metal accumulation in chubs, so how much heavy metals are these chubs accumulating. A little background information on chubs. A few common types of chubs found in the Mississippi River would be the sturgeon chub, the silver chub, and the sicklefin chub. Those are just three types found in the Mississippi River, and they are described as small ray-fin minnows, and they're about 3 inches in length, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. There's one that fits into the palm of someone's hand. So by their small size, it's very easy to see how other organisms can prey on them. So the materials needed for this experiment, we will obviously need the chubs to examine, and this experiment would be executed or carried out along with the Missouri Department of Conservation, so they will be providing the chubs for us in exchange for the data we find. Excuse me. The reagents needed for this experiment would be trace metal nitric and sulfuric acids and 30% hydrogen peroxide. We would also need syringe and syringe filters, and obviously we would need a lab space, and the lab space would be done at Southeast Missouri State University. In order to prepare the samples, we would insert one chub into a homogenizer. This would break down the fish into a very uniform liquid. We find it essential to use the chub in its entirety. Previous research I've looked at has shown that heavy metal can accumulate in the liver, in the bones, and very many different parts of the fish. So since we are able to break down the entire chub, since it's so small, I find it beneficial to put the entire fish in the homogenizer so we can increase the reliability of our results. So the fish will be placed in the homogenizer, and it's very good for breaking down bones and other parts of the fish into a uniform liquid. After this has been done, we will add reagents in the form of trace metal nitric and sulfuric acids. And these will just help further break down the sample, and then a little 30% hydrogen peroxide will be added in order to remove excess oxygen from the sample in order to improve the reading. And microwave digestion will be the method by which we further digest these chubs. They will be digested at 110 degrees Celsius for approximately 1 hour. The instrumentation we will use to gather our data will be an inductively coupled plasmic optical emission spectrometer, abbreviated ICP-OES. This is a very, very useful tool, especially for this experiment, because it will allow us to trace extremely low concentrations of hint metals. And since the fish we're examining are so small, this will be very, very useful for us. And this instrument also allows us to examine more than one element at a time, so we will be able to test each individual fish for lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. So this really allows us to maximize our resources to the fullest potential. The method we will be using for data analysis, we intend to construct internal standard calibration curves. Prior to testing, we will create an internal standard calibration curve for each analyte, the lead, the mercury, the arsenic, and the cadmium. We will create values with concentrations about 4 to 5 for each curve, from 0 to 1 parts per million, and the internal standard we intend to use would be yttrium. We believe the internal standard is the best option for this part of the experiment, because since we would be adding each yttrium in the same amount to each sample, we would be able to account for random fluctuations that may interfere with our readings, and this is something that external standard calibration curves don't do. As far as cost goes, this would be a very cost-effective experiment on our end. As discussed before, the chubs will be provided by the Missouri Department of Conservation, so they will be provided at zero cost to us. So the only things we would need to pay for would be the reagents, the trace metal nitric and sulfuric acids, the 30% hydrogen peroxide, heavy metal samples, and then the other glassware and equipment we would use, which would be the syringes, the syringe filters, as well as centrifuge tubes that would be used to digest the samples and to transfer them to the ICP-OES. Ethical and safety concerns for this experiment. One big one would be, how do we kill the chubs so that we may use them for testing? As I've mentioned a couple times before, the chubs would be provided by the Missouri Department of Conservation, and they would be deceased upon arrival to the laboratory here at Southeast Missouri State. So that process would be completely done by them, and we would not need to worry about that process as far as us conducting it. The reagents we are using are sulfuric and nitric acids. Those are corrosive and damaging to the human body, and heavy metals are also toxic when they come in contact with human skin. So we will take the proper safety precautions to ensure that these things don't happen. We will also be dealing with biological waste that contains heavy metals and sulfuric and nitric acid, so we will also ensure that this biological waste is disposed of up to regulations. Potential obstacles we could run into for this experiment. What would happen if the ICP-OES did not function? At the lab at Southeast, we have flame absorption spectroscopy as an option. Excuse me. And flame absorption spectroscopy is just inferior to ICP-OES in that we are unable to test for multiple heavy metals in each sample. So it really put a strain on our resources, having to test one heavy metal per fish. So that would really, really put a strain on our resources as far as how many fish we would be able to test. And a common research problem I found in consulting previous literature and researchers that have conducted similar experiments is that there is trouble getting a solid reading due to excess fat. Previous researchers I've talked to have said that due to the lipid content in certain fish, the reading they get from the ICP OES due to lipids covers up the reading from the heavy metals they're looking for. But in discussion with them, we are very confident that the amount of fat in a chub is so small, because it's such a small fish, that it would not interfere with the reading of the heavy metals. Outcomes for this experiment: if it is found that there is high heavy metal content in the fish, it would be reported to the Missouri Department of Conservation and other government agencies, so that they may take the necessary measures to ensure and minimize the amount of heavy metals that are getting into the Mississippi River. If there is high heavy metal content, this opens up a lot of windows for future research. Studies could be done on the pallid sturgeon or the catfish, seeing if they have elevated heavy metal levels, since they prey on these chubs that may have elevated heavy metals. And this also opens up research opportunities in water quality and analyzing the water for heavy metal content. In conclusion, I'd like to thank Dr. Cynthia Chu and Dr. Michael Rogers for guidance on creating this proposal. And if you have any questions concerning this proposal, please email me at ajnibert1s@cmo.edu. Thank you very much.